Rachel, not tonight. That seat's for Claire. I paused mid-step, staring at the chair I'd always sat in. Every Thanksgiving, every birthday, every milestone. My father avoided my eyes. My sister smirked. I wasn't just being excluded, I was being erased. You're making a scene, someone muttered. The laughter started, low, sharp, familiar. I turned to leave, my hands shook, my throat burned. Then a voice, calm, steady, impossible. Rachel, sit down, I turned back. It wasn't my father. It was my mother. Frail, sick for months, now standing tall. This is her house, her seat, her family, if any of you deserve to be part of it. The room fell into stunned silence. Forks hovered mid-air. Wine glasses paused inches from lips. The last clink of silver against china echoed louder than it should have. My mother, thin as paper and as pale as porcelain, stood with one trembling hand resting on the edge of the table. No one had seen her rise, not even me. Claire's mouth opened, then closed. My father's eyes narrowed. My brother, Caleb, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a slow, forced smirk rising like he was waiting for the punchline. This is her house, my mother repeated, louder now, and if you're going to act like strangers in it, then perhaps you're the ones who don't belong here tonight. It was Claire who broke first. Mum, what are you talking about? She said with a soft chuckle, eyes flicking towards the others like she expected backup. You're confused. Rachel hasn't lived here in years. But she never left us, my mother snapped. The words hit like a slap. My father's hand tightened around his wine glass. Claire turned to him, her smile brittle. Dad, can we just eat? She's blowing things out of proportion again. She's not, my mother said, reaching under her place setting. From beneath a stack of napkins, she pulled out a slim manila envelope, creased, sealed, and deliberate. I didn't want it to come to this, she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. But it seems you've all forgotten who's really held this house together. My legs felt like lead. I hadn't seen that envelope before, had no idea what she was about to reveal. For a year now, the family had whispered about her slipping mind, about her quiet forgetfulness. I'd visited every week, done her grocery runs, paid the landscaper, sat with her through doctor's visits. And through it all, she rarely spoke more than a few words. Now she was blazing. Rachel, she said, turning to me, come sit. I stood frozen at the doorway. My hand still clutched my purse strap like a lifeline. Everyone else was staring at her like she'd grown a second head. Sit, she repeated. And for the first time in a long time, I obeyed. I walked back towards the table slowly, heart hammering in my chest. Claire scowled as I approached, but she slid her chair back anyway, scraping harshly against the hardwood. I sat down back in my chair, the one that used to be mine. Mum placed the envelope in front of her, then looked each of them in the eye. 3 years ago, she said, I transferred this house into Rachel's name. Silence. Then Caleb laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. You what? She's been paying the taxes. She refinanced the roof. She saved the house from foreclosure last year when your father and I couldn't. You're not well, my father said coldly. This is absurd. No, what's absurd is sitting here pretending Claire runs this home when she hasn't lifted a finger. Claire's face flushed crimson. I cook. I visit. I clean. You take photos for Instagram, my mother shot back. That's not care, that's decoration. I barely breathed. Every word hit with the weight of a secret I never asked to be revealed. This isn't how I wanted tonight to go, Mum said, voice trembling now. But Rachel was about to walk out that door, and I won't let you push her out again. Claire's jaw tightened. Caleb looked away. My father downed the rest of his wine. The envelope still sat on the table, unopened but full of truth. My heart was pounding as my mother slowly opened the manila envelope, the crisp sound of the paper setting the room on edge. She pulled out several sheets of legal documents, laying them down one by one. There were contracts, signatures, and what looked like an official deed. "Here," she said quietly, pushing the first page towards me. "This is the transfer of property signed over to Rachel Monroe. It's dated a year ago, March 9th. I reached for the paper, my hands trembling. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. I stared at the words, my name bold and clear on the document, outlining the ownership of the house that had once been my childhood home. Everyone was watching me now, their eyes wide with shock. My father was the first to react. "No," he said, voice low, barely above a whisper. "That's not possible. We didn't agree to this." "You were too busy with other things," my mother replied calmly. Her voice almost a whisper, but somehow steady. "I made the decision. I'm sorry it took you by surprise, but Rachel's always been the one to carry the burden. It was time to make it official." I could barely breathe, still processing what I was reading. My hands were shaking so badly that I had to place the paper down before I dropped it. "I had no idea," I whispered, still in shock. "Why didn't you tell me, Mama?" "Because you never asked," she answered softly. "You just did what needed to be done without needing recognition, and I watched." As my mother continued to lay down page after page of legal documentation, explaining how the transfer had occurred, I felt the weight of everything settle around me. The house, my home, the place that had once felt like my sanctuary, was now officially mine. But the room was still filled with disbelief. Caleb finally spoke up, his voice tinged with frustration. "So, all this time, we've been in the dark. Rachel's been handling everything. Why didn't we know?" Mom paused, eyes sharp. "Because I needed to see if any of you cared enough to notice, if you could step up and take responsibility." The words hit like a slap. The truth of them stung more than I ever expected. This whole time I had been the one stepping in to fix the cracks, to repair what was broken, and yet I had been treated like the invisible one. The unspoken hero who was never recognised, never truly seen for the sacrifice and effort. I stared at the pages again, my mind reeling. But then, as if to break the tension, my mother slid something else across the table. It was a key, worn and slightly tarnished, but unmistakably familiar. The same key I had carried with me for years. "This is yours now," she said, her voice softer, yet full of finality. "You're the one who saved this house. You're the one who held it together, even when no one else would." I looked at the key in my palm, and for the first time in my life it felt heavy. Not just from the weight of the metal, but from the enormity of the responsibility I was being given. It was my house now, but it wasn't just about the property. It was about the years of sacrifice, the countless late nights, the phone calls I made to fix things when no one else cared to. And now it was official. I wasn't invisible anymore. For the first time in so long, I wasn't the shadow in my own family. I was the one holding the power, the one who was finally recognised, but the air in the room was still thick with tension. Caleb and my father exchanged uneasy glances. Claire's face was pale, her lips tight as she watched me, and my mother, though she had finally spoken the truth, looked exhausted, as though she had been carrying this secret for years. I took a deep breath, my fingers curling around the key, my grip firm. "I didn't do this for recognition," I said quietly, looking around at my family. "I did it because someone had to, and I will continue to do it, with or without any of you." The silence that followed was heavier than any word I could say. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I had a place at that table. I wasn't going anywhere. As I sat at the table, the weight of the key still heavy in my palm, my mind drifted back to when things first started to feel wrong. It wasn't just last night, or the years leading up to it. The feeling of being ignored, overlooked, it had been there for as long as I could remember. I was the older sibling, the one who should have been looked up to. But instead, Claire was always the centre of attention. Growing up, I learned quickly that the more you tried to stand out, the more invisible you became. Claire was the loud one, the one who was always in the spotlight, and I was the quiet one, the one who did the work while everyone else got the credit. I remembered the times when I was younger, just a girl trying to make a place for myself in a family that seemed to have no room for me. I'd bring home straight A's, but all anyone would talk about was how Claire had outdone herself in gymnastics or how she'd won the art competition at school. Nothing I did was ever enough to be seen. I remember asking my father once, when I was about 12, why he didn't seem proud of me. I had just finished a grueling piano recital, one of my best performances yet, and I wanted his approval more than anything. Instead of the praise I was hoping for, he barely looked up from his newspaper. "Good job, kid," he muttered, eyes still glued to the paper. And that was it. I'd looked at him, waiting for something more, but he didn't even notice. It was as if I didn't matter at all. In that moment, I realised I would never get the recognition I craved from him. My accomplishments, my efforts, they meant nothing. I was just another face in the crowd. The silence from my mother was just as crushing. She was always there, but never truly present. She would spend hours with Claire, helping her with her school projects, giving her advice, showering her with love and praise. But when it came to me, it was different. I did everything on my own, and I had learned to do it quietly, without complaint. I didn't ask for her help because I knew it wouldn't come. So I made do with what I had, trying not to draw attention to myself, but at the same time hoping that one day someone would notice. I think that's when I started to understand that I would always be the one left behind. No matter how much I did, it would never be enough. My achievements were always overshadowed by Claire's. My failures were always swept under the rug, and no one ever seemed to care about my feelings. I grew up in a family where love wasn't expressed in words or actions. It was the unspoken rule that if you didn't ask for attention, you didn't get it. And I didn't ask. Even as I became an adult, nothing changed. I kept hoping that one day my family would see me. But every time I tried to break free from the role they had assigned me, I was pulled back in, like a tethered balloon that could never quite fly. I had moved out of the house when I turned 18, determined to make a life for myself away from the shadows. But even then I felt like I was living on the periphery. Every time I came back home for a visit, I felt like an outsider. I wasn't Rachel, the daughter. I was just the one who happened to share their blood, the one they didn't really know. And that was when I realised it wasn't just my childhood that had been filled with silence. It was the entire relationship I had with my family, quiet, invisible and distant. I was never enough for them. I never got what I needed, and for years I thought it was my fault. But sitting at that table, holding the key to a house I had kept standing by myself for so long, I finally understood. I had been forgotten, overlooked, abandoned. Not because I wasn't enough, but because they never really cared to see me. The truth was, I had always been the one to care, to hold everything together while they simply watched from the sidelines. It wasn't until that moment, when I looked down at the key in my hand, that I realised I was finally free. Over the years, I had taken on the role of keeper, of the house, of the memories, of everything that seemed to be slipping through the cracks. I didn't expect gratitude. I didn't even expect recognition. I just needed the house to stay standing, and I was determined to keep it that way, no matter the cost. There were so many things no one knew, things I never said aloud. The roof had needed repairs for months, but every time I brought it up, my father would brush me off, as if it was just another inconvenience that would resolve itself. The gutters had become clogged, the porch steps were sinking, and the walls were beginning to sag in places. But no one else noticed. They didn't want to. So I fixed it. I called the contractor, paid the bills out of my own pocket, and made sure the house remained safe. When the insurance lapsed last winter, I was the one who caught it just in time, calling the company myself, ensuring the coverage didn't drop. I kept the utility bills paid, the lawn mowed, and the house running smoothly. All the while, no one knew the stress it put on me. No one cared to ask. But somewhere along the way, I had started to believe that if I kept doing this, they would eventually see what I was doing. They would recognise my sacrifice. They would understand how much I was holding this house, this family, together. But as the years passed, I realised I was fooling myself. It wasn't long before I found out the truth. I had come by the house one afternoon after working a long shift, and as I opened the front door, I noticed something strange. There was a letter on the kitchen counter. I knew the handwriting, Claire's. But this wasn't a birthday card or a thank you note. This was something much more dangerous. I read through it quickly, my heart sinking with every line. Claire had taken it upon herself to refinance the house. Not only had she made financial decisions without telling anyone, but she had also signed documents to put the house in her name temporarily, while my mother was still the official owner. But that wasn't all. She had filed for a mortgage loan, using the house as collateral without consulting any of us. I stared at the papers, unable to move. The realisation hit me hard. Claire had never been interested in taking care of the house. She had been planning to sell it for months, maybe longer. She wanted the money, wanted to cash in on the family home without so much as a second thought to what it meant to me, to my mother, to our family history. I couldn't believe it. My own sister, the one I had always tried to protect, had gone behind my back and tried to steal what little I had left. But the worst part was the betrayal. Claire had done all of this without anyone knowing. My mother, though frail, was still mentally sharp enough to notice something was wrong. When she found the mortgage papers hidden in Claire's room, she didn't hesitate. She knew she had to act fast. Without saying anything to me, she took immediate action. She contacted her lawyer, transferred the house into my name, and arranged everything to protect me from Claire's plan. And then, in a move that stunned me, she faked her memory loss. She pretended to forget about the paperwork, about the house, about everything that had happened, so that she could shield me from the turmoil that would surely follow. It broke my heart to know that she had been living in a constant state of fear, pretending to forget, just to protect me from the same family that had ignored me for years. But now, as I looked back at the events, I understood. She had done it out of love, out of a fierce need to keep me safe, even if it meant wearing a mask of forgetfulness. When I found out the truth, I felt a mix of anger, sorrow, and disbelief. The house, my childhood home, had almost been ripped from my grasp. But my mother, despite her frailty, had acted decisively. She had protected me from Claire's greed and from my father's indifference. For the first time in years, I understood just how much my mother had always cared, even though she had never been able to express it. She had silently fought for me, just as I had silently fought for the house. And now, as I stood there holding the key in my hand, I realised something else. This house, this life I had built for myself, wasn't just mine. It was ours, my mother and me. The first sign that something was wrong came in the form of an email. It was a late Tuesday afternoon, and I was sipping coffee in my small apartment when the notification popped up. A subject line caught my attention. Listing photos for 1234 Willow Drive. My heart skipped a beat. I had no idea what it was, but my mind immediately raced to the house. Our house. I clicked the email open and my stomach dropped. The photos were of the house, our home, staged in perfect condition. Freshly painted walls, the furniture meticulously arranged, every corner highlighted with soft lighting and immaculate detail. It was a real estate listing. But why hadn't I been told? Why was Claire involved in this? I scrolled through the photos, and sure enough, there were the details at the bottom of the page. The listing agent's name, the price, far higher than I could ever afford to pay. It was then that I saw the worst part. The listing date. Tomorrow. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears as I stared at the screen. I closed the email in a rush, my hands shaking. For a moment I just stood there in the silence of my apartment, the weight of what I had just discovered pressing down on me like a stone. How could she? How could Claire go behind my back and try to sell the house? I knew I had to confront her, and I knew I had to do it now. I didn't even wait to change out of my work clothes. I grabbed my keys, locked the door behind me, and drove to the house, the familiar route feeling like a ghost trail. When I arrived, the house stood in front of me, as solid and unyielding as it ever had been, but somehow it felt like it was no longer mine. I parked my car in the driveway and walked up to the front door, my breath tight in my chest. Inside, the family was gathered, sitting around the dinner table. Claire, my father, Caleb, they were all there, as if everything were normal. I stood at the door for a moment, taking it all in. The laughter, the chatter, it was all too familiar, too comfortable. But underneath it all, I could feel the betrayal. I walked in without saying a word. My mother looked up first, then my father, and finally Claire. She looked surprised, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her lips pressed tight. She knew I knew. "Rachel," my father asked, his voice cautious. "What's going on? You're interrupting dinner." "I think we need to talk about something," I said, my voice steady but firm. I could feel all eyes on me as I moved towards the table. "Claire," I said, addressing her directly, "I think you've been planning to sell this house. Care to explain why I wasn't told?" Claire's eyes widened and she let out a soft, nervous laugh. "What are you talking about?" she said, her voice high and almost too forced. "Why would you think that?" I didn't need to say more. I pulled out my phone and showed them the email I'd found. The photos, the listing, the price. "Sure, you're selling the house, Claire," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but the words seemed to ring through the room, behind my back without telling me, without anyone's permission. Claire froze, her face going pale as the truth hit her. The room was silent for a moment, the weight of what was happening sinking in. My father's eyes darted from Claire to me, and I could feel the growing tension. "I don't know what you're talking about," Claire said again, but her voice cracked. "Those pictures, I was just helping with staging. I didn't—" "Helping?" I interrupted. "Helping? Claire, the house wasn't up for sale when I left this morning. You've been planning this for months, haven't you?" She looked down at her hands, trying to avoid my gaze. Her voice was quieter now. I didn't think it would be a big deal. You thought you could just sell it without anyone knowing, without even telling me." I was angry now, my voice rising, but I couldn't help it. This was my home, my responsibility, and she was trying to take it from me. I turned to my father. "How could you let this happen? You've known, haven't you?" He didn't meet my eyes. Instead, he took a long sip of his wine and sighed. "It's complicated, Rachel. Claire thought she was doing the right thing. She just wanted to help. She thought—" "No," I cut him off. "She thought she could get away with it, and you let her." The air in the room was thick with tension now. No one spoke for a moment. But it was clear. Claire's plan was unravelling. She had been caught, and she didn't have an explanation that would make sense anymore. "I never wanted it to be this way," she said, her voice small. "I just thought, if we sold it, we could all move on. Maybe we could get something better." "Well, it's not your decision to make," I said firmly. "This house is staying right where it is, and you're not selling it. Not now, not ever." The table fell silent again. And this time, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel like the outsider anymore. I was in control. This house was mine, and I was finally going to protect it. The silence in the room was suffocating. But then my mother broke it. She had been sitting quietly, eyes cast down, as if waiting for the perfect moment. She slowly reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device, the kind you'd expect a lawyer to use, the kind that records conversations. She placed it carefully on the table in front of her. "Before we continue," she said, her voice calm but firm, "I think it's time you all heard something." The weight of her words hung in the air as she pressed play. A faint click sounded, followed by the unmistakable voice of Claire. "I don't care what happens," Claire's voice echoed in the room. "If we sell the house, I get my cut. The house is worth a lot, and once we get a buyer, I'll make sure we split the proceeds. Rachel doesn't need to know. She's too busy playing hero to see what's actually happening." My breath caught in my throat. I had heard those words before, her voice laced with entitlement, but hearing it now in the silence of the dining room made it feel real. My own sister had been plotting behind my back. The betrayal hit harder than anything I had imagined. Claire's face paled as the recording continued. "We'll sell it, divide the money, and I'll make sure Rachel doesn't get anything. She won't care, she'll just be happy to have the weight lifted off her shoulders. She won't even notice." It was like a knife twisting in my chest, and I could see Claire's eyes dart around the room, desperately trying to find an escape from the truth that had been exposed. But there was no escape now. My mother's actions had laid everything bare. "How could you?" I asked, my voice low, trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "How could you say that about me? You've been lying to everyone, including yourself." Claire's face flushed a deep red, her hands trembling. She opened her mouth to speak but faltered, unsure of how to deny what was so obviously true. It wasn't like that. No more lies, Claire," I said sharply, cutting her off. "You've been planning to sell our family home for your own gain, and you don't even care about the consequences." As if the floodgates had opened, I found myself getting louder. "Do you know how much I've done for this house? Do you know how many times I've kept it together when no one else would? And this is what you think is right? You think I'm just going to roll over and let you sell it? You don't even care about the memories we have here, our family history." The anger inside me swelled, but this time it wasn't just about what Claire had done. It was about all the years of feeling overlooked, like I didn't matter. All the years of quietly holding everything together while my family turned a blind eye. But no more. "I don't know what you were thinking, Claire, but here's the thing," I said, turning to face everyone at the table. "From this moment on, I am in control of this house. I am the one who makes the decisions now." I looked at my father and Caleb, who were both silent, their eyes downcast. They had never fought for me. They had never stood by me when I needed them. But now it was my turn to stand up, to make my voice heard. "From now on, this house will operate under 3 rules," I continued, each word sharper than the last. "Respect, safety, boundaries. If you can't follow those, you don't get to be part of this family, and you certainly don't get to have a say in what happens here." Claire was silent now, her face a mix of frustration and fear. My mother, though frail, had a small, almost approving smile tugging at the corners of her lips. She had been waiting for this moment. She had been waiting for me to finally take control. "We're going to live here as a family again," I said, my voice softening just a little. "But we're going to do it right. No more hiding behind secrets. No more pretending everything's okay when it's not. We're going to face the truth, no matter how hard it is." I could see the shock in my father's eyes, but there was something else too. Maybe a hint of regret. Maybe even a glimmer of pride. Caleb didn't speak, but his posture had softened slightly. "I've been the one holding this together," I continued, "and I will continue to do so, but now I will do it on me terms. So if you can't respect that, then there's no place for you here." For a long moment, no one said anything. It was as if the weight of my words was settling over them, forcing them to see what they had never bothered to see before. Claire stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. "I don't need this," she said, her voice tight. "I'll figure this out on my own." She stormed out of the room, the door slamming behind her. The tension in the air was thick, but for the first time in years it didn't feel like a weight. It felt like relief, like I had finally reclaimed something I had lost long ago. This house, my house, was mine to protect, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it away from me. The silence in the room grew heavier with each passing second. As Claire stormed out, my father and Caleb sat frozen, unsure of how to respond. I could feel their eyes on me, but I wasn't going to let them off the hook this time. It was time to finally speak the truth. It was time for them to see everything I had been doing behind the scenes, the countless hours I spent, the money I poured into this house, the sacrifices no one had ever acknowledged. I stood up, my voice steady but firm. "I want you to hear something," I said, addressing my father and Caleb. "You've all been ignoring what's been happening to this house, to this family, but I've been the one holding everything together." I could feel the sting of their indifference, but I pushed it aside. It was time to tell them the truth. Time to make them realise how much I had been doing and how little they had noticed. I walked to the living room, grabbed a stack of papers from the table and brought them to the dinner table. One by one, I laid them down in front of my father and Caleb. "This is the list of repairs I've paid for," I said, pointing to each sheet. "I paid for the roof repair last winter because the leak was going to destroy the entire attic. I called a plumber last month because the pipes had started to corrode. I fixed the electrical issues in the kitchen because the wiring was dangerously outdated." My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but he didn't say anything. Caleb just stared at the papers, his jaw clenched. Neither of them spoke a word. They were both hearing it for the first time, just how much I had done. How much I had been carrying all on my own. "I've also been paying the insurance premiums for this house," I continued. "I've made sure the coverage was up to date because if something had happened and it wasn't, we would have lost everything. And you know what? No one even knew. No one even asked." I paused, letting my words sink in. The room was eerily quiet. I could hear my own breath, the sound of my heart beating in my chest. It was as if they were finally starting to see me, finally starting to hear me. Caleb finally spoke up, but his voice was tinged with disbelief. "Rachel, we didn't know any of this. You should have told us." I shook my head. "I didn't need to. You didn't need to know. I did it because it was the right thing to do. You all had your own lives to worry about. I didn't expect anything in return. But now you're questioning everything I've done." My father sighed, rubbing his face with his hand. "We've been busy, Rachel, you know that. We didn't realise it had gotten this bad." "You didn't realise or didn't want to," I retorted, my voice sharp. "You've been so busy pretending everything was fine, you didn't notice the cracks forming under your feet. The house was literally falling apart, and I was the one who had to pick up the pieces. I had to do it all, and I did it alone, while you all just sat back and ignored it." Claire's voice suddenly cut through the tension, her words dripping with sarcasm as she walked back into the room. "Oh, here we go again. The 'I'm the only one who matters' speech. Honestly, Rachel, you don't need to make it seem like you're some kind of hero. You did it to get attention, didn't you? You wanted the credit." Her words hit me like a slap. I could feel my blood boil. "This isn't about getting attention, Claire. This is about doing what needed to be done. If you had even cared to notice, you would have seen how much work I put into this house, into keeping this family afloat. But you were too busy thinking about yourself." She scoffed, crossing her arms. "Right, because everything's always about you. You want recognition, don't you? All I hear is you complaining about being the martyr, the one who does everything for everyone. But guess what? It's not as heroic as you think." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "No, Claire, I don't want recognition. I want respect. I want you to realise that I've been holding this family together when no one else could. I don't need your approval, but I sure as hell deserve better than your insults." I looked at my father, who was still sitting there, his face unreadable. "Do you have anything to say? Anything at all?" But there was nothing. He just sat there, quiet, as if the words were stuck in his throat. "I'm done playing the invisible one in this family," I said, standing up straight, my voice unwavering. "This house, this family, it's mine to protect now, and from here on out there will be 3 rules you'll all follow: respect, safety, boundaries. If you can't follow those, then you're not welcome here. Simple as that." With that, I turned and walked towards the door. I wasn't leaving, this was my home, and I was going to make sure everyone knew it. As I stepped outside, the night air felt colder than usual, but it was a comfort. It was the air of freedom, the freedom to stand up for myself, to no longer hide in the shadows. I had finally claimed what was mine, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it away from me. I stood there, my back to the table, feeling the tension in the air like a thick fog. I could hear my family behind me, but I didn't turn around. I wasn't sure I wanted to see the disbelief on their faces, the same faces that had always seen me as an afterthought. I had finally said the words that needed to be said, and now there was silence, a heavy kind of silence that settled deep in my chest. Just as I was about to leave the room, a soft voice called out behind me. It was my mother. "Rachel," she said, her voice quiet but filled with something I couldn't quite place. "Come back here, please." I hesitated but turned around. My mother's frail frame was still seated at the table, but there was something in her eyes that made me stop. She wasn't speaking out of weakness anymore. There was a steadiness to her that I hadn't seen in years. I walked back towards her slowly, not sure what to expect. She took a deep breath and then, for the first time in years, she began to speak about things I never thought she would. Things I had never known, but things that had been quietly eating away at her all this time. "I never told you, Rachel," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never told you how many times you've been the one to save me, and how many times you've done things for me without ever asking for anything in return." I stood frozen, caught off guard by the sudden honesty in her words. My mother, who had always been silent and distant, was opening up in a way I had never imagined. "Do you remember last year, when I had that fall in the garden?" she asked, her eyes distant as though she was recalling the moment. "You were the one who called the ambulance at 2 a.m. You told them to take me to the hospital even when the doctors wanted to send me home because they thought I was fine. They wanted to send me back in a cab. But you refused to leave. You insisted that I stay for more tests, and it turned out I had internal bleeding." Her words hit me like a thunderclap. I had known about the fall, of course, but I didn't know the full extent of what had happened. I didn't know how close I had come to losing her, because no one else had cared enough to fight for her. I had made the calls, stayed in the waiting room for hours, and kept my frustration hidden, not even realised that what I had done had saved her life. "I remember," I whispered, my throat tight. I didn't know what to say. I had always thought it was just another thing I did to help, something I didn't think twice about. But hearing her speak these words made it clear just how much I had been carrying. "There's more," she continued, her voice trembling now. "When the contractor overcharged us for the roof repairs last winter, you were the one who negotiated with him. You kept him from taking advantage of us. And when the leak started in the hallway, you tore up your weekend to bring a dehumidifier and fix it yourself. You didn't even ask for my help. You just did it. And I watched you, Rachel. I watched you do all of this without ever complaining, without ever asking for anything." The more she spoke, the heavier my heart became. It wasn't just the tasks that I had taken on. It was the emotional weight, the quiet, constant effort of holding this family together while they all carried on with their lives, oblivious to what was happening in the background. I could feel the sting of tears threatening to rise, but I swallowed them down. This wasn't about my tears. It was about everything she had been through, everything I had been through. "You never asked for credit, Rachel," my mother said, her voice soft but full of meaning. "But you've always been the one to hold us up. I know you felt invisible, but I see you. I've always seen you." I looked around the table at the faces of my family, and for the first time I didn't feel like a ghost. I didn't feel invisible. My mother's words had finally given me a place to stand. But then I glanced at Claire. She was sitting back in her chair, arms crossed, her eyes narrowed with something I couldn't quite read. I saw the flicker of annoyance in her expression, the way her lips tightened as she listened to my mother's praise. She didn't like this. She didn't like seeing me finally being recognised for the work I had done for this family. I knew then that Claire's true nature had begun to show itself. While the rest of us had been dealing with the cracks in our relationships, Claire had been feeding her own insecurities, feeding the idea that she was the one who deserved more, the one who should be in charge. Her expression was one of frustration, of jealousy. "I don't need any of this," Claire muttered, her voice laced with bitterness. "This is all just to make Rachel look good, isn't it? Well, congratulations, Rachel, you're the hero now. But that doesn't change anything." Her words stung, but they didn't hold the same weight they would have a year ago. I had nothing to prove to Claire anymore. My mother had finally spoken the truth. And for once, I wasn't invisible. As the silence spread across the room, I realised something important. It didn't matter if Claire understood. It didn't matter if anyone else did. I had finally found my voice, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it away from me. The atmosphere in the room was charged with an energy I hadn't felt in years. My mother's words had just opened the floodgates, and I wasn't going to let anyone ignore them. For too long, I had silently endured the way things were, watching as my efforts were either ignored or taken for granted. Now, things were different. I wasn't going to sit back anymore. It was time for everyone to see that I wasn't just the caretaker. I wasn't just the one who cleaned up the messes. I was the one who had carried this family. I stood in front of the dining table, my posture strong, my eyes unwavering. From now on, I said, my voice steady, if you want to be part of this house, if you want to be part of this family, there will be rules. No more pretending everything is fine when it's not. No more games. We respect each other, we make this place safe, and we know where the boundaries lie. Claire snorted, her arms crossed, a mocking smile on her lips. What, you're going to start making rules now? She asked. You're really going to act like you're in charge here? I didn't flinch. This was exactly what I had expected from her. I wasn't going to let her make this moment about her. Yes, I said, my gaze meeting hers. I am. And if you can't follow the rules, then you won't be welcome here. I saw Caleb's eyes shift uncomfortably, but he said nothing. My father just stared at his plate, his face unreadable. But they were all listening now. For once, they were paying attention. The first rule, I continued, my voice cutting through the tension in the air, is respect. I've been the one holding this house together, and from now on, that will be acknowledged. No more disrespect. No more pretending I don't exist or I'm not doing enough. I'm not invisible anymore. I will not be treated as a burden, and neither will Mom. There was a brief silence, but I could feel their reluctance hanging in the air. It was like they were unsure how to react to this new version of me, the version that wasn't afraid to speak up, to demand the space I deserved. The second rule is safety, I said, feeling a surge of conviction. This house is a home. We'll keep it safe for everyone who lives here. And that means no more late-night parties without permission. No more breaking things down just because you think you can. You all have your lives, but under this roof, we take care of things. We don't let this house fall apart again. If anyone jeopardises that, you'll be out. I saw my father shift slightly, his eyes now meeting mine for the first time in the conversation. He didn't speak, but I knew he was hearing me. For years he had let things slide, let the house deteriorate, let the family fall apart, and I was done letting him pretend that none of it mattered. Finally, I addressed the third and final rule. The third rule is boundaries. No more surprise visits. No more just showing up because you think you have the right. If you want to be part of this family, respect my time and my space. If I say I need time for myself, you respect that. If I say no to something, you listen. Claire let out a laugh, the sound sharp and cutting. Boundaries, she repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. You're going to kick us out if we don't play by your rules? You really think you're in control now? I didn't back down. Yes, I do, I replied firmly. I've been taking care of everyone's mess for years, and it stops now. If you don't like the rules, then you don't have to stay. But if you're going to live under this roof, you'll follow them. I won't apologise for wanting peace, for wanting a family that respects each other. And that's non-negotiable. There was a heavy pause. I could see my mother's lips twitching into the faintest smile, though she quickly suppressed it. She wasn't saying anything, but I could tell she was glad to see me stand up, to finally put my foot down. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was taking charge, not just of the house, but of my place within this family. I wasn't the invisible daughter anymore. I wasn't the one who always gave in. I was in control, and they had to deal with it. Claire shot me a glare, but instead of saying something cutting, she fell silent. It was as though she didn't know how to respond to this new version of me. Caleb remained quiet, his hands tightly gripping the edge of his chair, while my father still avoided looking at me. I'm done being the one who sacrifices for everyone else, I said, my tone softening but still firm. I've done it for so long that I lost myself in it. But no more. This house, my house, will be a place where we all respect each other. If we can't do that, then it's not a family. It's just a bunch of people living together. Moi, Claire let out a long breath, clearly frustrated, but she didn't say anything more. My father didn't speak either, but I noticed his shoulders sagging just a little. Maybe he was tired of the pretending too. You can stay, I said, my voice finally softening, but only if you follow the rules. If you can't do that, then you can leave. I turned and walked towards the door, but before I left, I looked back at my mother, her frail form still seated at the table, and for the first time I didn't feel alone. As I left the room, I felt the weight of the past years lift off my shoulders. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about me, standing tall, setting boundaries, and demanding the respect I had always deserved. As I turned to leave the room, my father's voice cut through the tension, sharp and heavy with anger. "Rachel!" he bellowed, his voice thick with frustration. I paused, my hand resting on the doorknob. I had expected this, expected him to push back, but something in his tone made me turn around. "What is it, Dad?" I asked, my voice steady, though I could feel the weight of everything starting to build again. He stood up from the table, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His face was red, his fists clenched at his sides. "You think you can just take over? You think you can control everything? I'm still the head of this family. You're just a daughter. You don't have the right to make decisions like this, Rachel." I felt the anger flare inside me, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I crossed my arms and met his gaze, unflinching. "I've been doing this for years, Dad. You haven't even noticed. I've been holding everything together while you've been too busy with your own life. Now, you can either accept it or leave, but you don't get to tell me what to do anymore." He took a step towards me, his eyes narrowing. "You don't understand, Rachel. This isn't how it works. I'm your father. I'm in charge here." I shook my head slowly. "Not anymore. You gave up that right a long time ago. You never saw what I was doing. You never cared." He was silent for a moment, staring at me as if trying to understand what I was saying. Then his face twisted in frustration. "I can still fix this. I'll make sure you don't get your way. I'll get a lawyer." I cut him off, my voice growing firm. "You're too late, Dad. You don't have any legal claim to this house anymore. It's mine." He froze, his expression faltering for the first time. His eyes flickered towards my mother, who had remained silent throughout this exchange. She had been watching the entire scene unfold, but now, as if she had been waiting for the perfect moment, she finally spoke. "It's true," she said softly, her voice surprisingly calm. "What Rachel said is true. Your father and I were going to sell the house. We were going to use the proceeds to invest in something else, to start fresh, as he put it. But when Rachel took charge, when she started taking care of everything, I knew it wasn't right. I knew I couldn't let her lose everything." My father's jaw dropped. "You were going to sell the house?" His voice was barely above a whisper, disbelief in every syllable. "You didn't tell me about this. You've kept this from me. For how long?" My mother nodded, her hands folded in her lap. "I had to protect Rachel from your plan. You and I both know the house was falling apart, and you refused to see it. Rachel saved this house, saved me. She's the one who kept it standing when no one else cared." The room was completely still. My father's face turned an ugly shade of purple as he turned his gaze to my mother, then back to me. There was no more argument, no more attempts to hold power over me. He had lost that battle long ago, but hearing my mother's confession seemed to take the last bit of air from the room. For the first time, I saw the full weight of his failure, his inability to take responsibility for anything that mattered. He was angry, yes, but it was an anger rooted in humiliation. He had tried to control everything, but it was my mother and I who had saved this family, this home. I glanced around the room, feeling the eyes of my family on me. My father's fury was almost palpable, but I wasn't backing down. This wasn't about a battle for power anymore. It was about respect. "I'm not kicking anyone out," I said slowly, my voice clear and unwavering, "but I've worked too hard to let you all tear this place down, whether physically or emotionally. If you can't live here with respect for me and for each other, then it's better if you don't live here at all." I saw my father open his mouth to say something, but no words came out. He was beaten and he knew it. I turned to Claire. She had been quiet for the entire conversation, her face unreadable, but I could tell she was seething. I didn't care. "You're not going to sell this house, Claire. You're not going to tear this family apart for your own gain. Not anymore." I could see the anger bubbling up in her eyes, but she didn't speak. For once, she seemed at a loss. As I took a step back towards the door, I felt a sense of finality settle in. This was it. The rules were set, the power had shifted, and I was no longer the daughter who had been forgotten. I was the one in control, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. "I'm done trying to make things work when they're broken," I said, my voice quieter now but still firm. "If you're here to build, then we'll build together. If not, then you can go. This house won't stand for anyone who doesn't respect it. Or me." With that, I turned and left the room. Behind me, the sound of the door closing was a promise, one I would keep. This was my home, this was my life, and for the first time I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. The morning light streamed in through the windows, but there was no warmth in it. The air felt charged, like a storm was brewing. I had barely slept the night before, too restless to get comfortable with all the unresolved tension hanging in the air. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's angry face, Claire's smug expression, and my mother, her silent approval that had slowly shifted into something more powerful. I knew today would be another battle, but I was ready for it. I wasn't going to back down. I was standing in the living room talking to the contractor when I heard the sound of tyres crunching on the gravel outside. I didn't need to look out the window to know who it was. My heart sank just a little. It wasn't just my father this time. It was everyone. They were all here together, and I knew they had come to confront me. I took a deep breath and turned back to the contractor, keeping my tone professional. "Let's finalise the plan for the back deck. I want to make sure everything's scheduled for next week. No delays," I said, though part of me felt the weight of what was about to unfold outside. The contractor nodded, pulling out a clipboard to make some final notes. "Of course, I'll get this wrapped up. You're making the right call, Rachel," he added, giving me a reassuring smile. I barely acknowledged him. My thoughts were with the family waiting outside. I didn't need to look to know that they were standing there, waiting like they always had for someone to give them the green light to move forward. But this time I wasn't going to let them take control. A knock at the door broke my train of thought. I couldn't help the sigh that escaped me. It was time. I walked over and opened the door, and there they were, my father, Claire and Caleb, all standing together like they had come as a unified front. They stood in the doorway, eyes narrowed, as if they were preparing for a battle. Claire had her arms crossed, a look of disdain on her face, while my father just looked tired, as if the fight was wearing him down. Caleb remained silent, hovering in the background as usual. "Rachel," my father began, his voice already tinged with frustration, "we need to talk." "Of course," I replied, stepping aside to let them in. "But we'll do it here. I'm in the middle of finalising the work on the house." Claire shot me a look that was both condescending and dismissive. "I don't know why you're making such a big deal about this. It's just a few repairs. You're acting like you're the only one who cares about this place." I held my ground, refusing to let her words shake me. "It's not just a few repairs, Claire. This house needs to be maintained. You can't just treat it like a saleable asset. It's not a product, it's my home." "You're being dramatic," she snapped, her tone sharp. "It's just a house. It doesn't mean anything to you, not really." I could feel the tension building. I glanced back at my father, who was standing silently by the door. He was clearly uncomfortable, but he wasn't saying anything. I wasn't sure whether he was too defeated to speak up, or if he still thought he could control the situation. "I didn't ask for a confrontation, Claire," I said, my voice steady. "But if you're here to continue fighting over this house, then I'm not going to entertain it. You've made your move and I've made mine. We'll see who wins in the end." That's when my father finally spoke, his voice thick with anger. "Rachel, stop playing the martyr. This isn't just your decision to make. We've all lived here for years, and you're acting like you're the only one who cares about what happens. You've been keeping everyone out, making decisions without consulting anyone." I stared at him, unblinking. "You're right. I didn't consult anyone because you were never around when I needed help. You were too busy with your own life to see what was going on with the house. Or with me." Claire opened her mouth to argue, but my father raised his hand, silencing her. He turned back to me, his voice quieter but no less forceful. "Rachel, you don't get to just take control of everything. This house, our family, needs to be a shared responsibility. You can't do it all alone." I paused, taking a deep breath. The weight of his words felt different now. It was no longer the same old guilt-tripping I had grown up with. It was desperation. He was trying to hold on to whatever power he thought he had left, but I wasn't going to let that happen. "I'm not doing this alone, Dad," I said, my voice strong. "I've been doing this with no support from you, from Claire, from anyone. I've done the work, I've paid the bills, I've kept this house together, and I'm done being told that it's not my place to do so. I have a place here, just like anyone else, and now I'm making sure my voice is heard." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the frustration in my father's eyes, the disbelief. He hadn't expected this. He had expected me to fall back into the role I had played for years, the invisible one, the one who quietly did the work and took whatever came her way. But not anymore. "I'm not kicking anyone out," I said, my voice softening. "But you all have to respect the rules I've set. If you can't, then you won't be welcome here. This house will only work if we all work together. If we can't do that, then we're done pretending." There was a long pause before my father spoke again, his voice tight. "Fine, but don't think you've won this. We'll see what happens." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The battle wasn't over, but I had won this round, and I knew that the war was mine to finish. The air in the room was thick with tension. Claire's words still hung there like smoke, choking the space between us. Her jaw was clenched tight, her hands shaking with barely controlled rage. She couldn't stand the idea that I had taken control. She couldn't accept that after all these years I was the one standing here, this time not as a background player, but as the one holding the power. "I'm not letting this go," Claire said through gritted teeth, her voice shaking with anger. "I'm going to sue you, Rachel. You're not getting away with this. I'll fight you every step of the way, and I'll make sure you don't walk away with everything." I could feel my father's presence shift behind me, and I turned to look at him. His face was drawn, his eyes avoiding mine. He hadn't spoken up until now, but he was clearly uneasy. Maybe he finally realised that Claire wasn't as innocent as he had always believed. Maybe he was finally starting to see the truth of the situation. But it was Claire who had my full attention. She stood there, her fists balled at her sides, her eyes filled with a mix of frustration and desperation. "Mum was forced to transfer everything to you. She didn't have a choice. I'll get proof. There's no way she was in her right mind when she signed those papers." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "You can try, Claire, but you've already lost. You think I don't know what you were up to." Claire opened her mouth to protest, but then something unexpected happened. My mother, who had been sitting quietly through all of this, finally stood up. She rose from her chair slowly, her frail body trembling as she pushed herself to her feet. There was a moment where I thought she might collapse, where I thought she might falter as she had so many times before. But then something shifted. Her eyes, normally filled with confusion, cleared. Her posture straightened. The frail, forgotten woman I had been taking care of for so long was gone. In her place was someone I hadn't seen in years, the woman who was still sharp, still in control of her own fate. "Rachel's right," my mother said. her voice steady but powerful. "I wasn't forced into anything." I watched as she slowly walked over to the table, her hands shaking but her resolve firm. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small USB drive. She placed it on the table between us, her hands trembling slightly as she did so. "This," she said quietly, "is the proof you need, Claire." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I turned to my mother, trying to comprehend what was happening, but she continued, her voice steady. "I recorded the entire meeting with the lawyer when I transferred the property to Rachel. The decision was mine and I knew exactly what I was doing. I may have had moments of forgetfulness, but when it came to what mattered most, I was clear. And I wasn't going to let anyone take this house from my daughter." My father's eyes widened and he looked at my mother as though seeing her for the first time. There was a shift in the room, like something unspoken had been cracked open. But the real shock came when my mother hit the button on the small device in front of us and the video began to play. I could hear the lawyer's voice, followed by my mother's calm, clear words as she signed the transfer documents. The recording revealed every detail, the careful, thoughtful decision she had made, her unwavering determination to protect me. I could see Claire's face fall as the video played, the weight of the truth sinking in with every passing second. She had tried to manipulate the situation, tried to paint herself as the victim, but there was no escape now. The proof was irrefutable. You recorded that?" Claire's voice broke, and for the first time I saw something that looked like fear flash in her eyes. "Of course I did," my mother said, her voice soft but confident. "I needed to make sure nothing like this would happen. I had no idea how far you would go to get what you wanted." Claire's face twisted in fury, her entire body trembling with rage. "This is impossible," she screamed, her voice rising in pitch. "You lied to me, Mom. You've been lying to everyone. You're supposed to be my mother, not hers. You're supposed to care about me." "I do care about you, Claire," my mother said gently, her voice filled with a quiet sadness. "But not in the way you think. I've always cared about you, but I can't keep supporting actions that aren't right. You've made decisions without thinking about the consequences, and now you have to live with them." Claire's eyes burned with anger, but there was nothing left for her to say. She was cornered, exposed for everything she had done. Her dreams of taking control, of selling the house and making it her own, had shattered. Without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her so hard that the walls rattled. The silence that followed her departure was deafening. My father didn't speak. He didn't know what to say. He hadn't expected any of this. He hadn't expected me or my mother to finally stand up. I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of everything I had just fought for. I was finally the one who was in control. And as I looked at my father, the man who had always been the one to make the decisions, I could see the realization in his eyes. This wasn't his battle anymore, it was mine. He finally spoke, his voice small, almost resigned. "You've done it, Rachel." I don't know what to say. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to say anything back. My actions had spoken for me. That night, after everything had calmed down, I found myself sitting with my mother in the quiet of the living room. The house had been filled with so much noise, shouted words, slammed doors. But now there was only silence. It felt strange, almost surreal, as if everything had shifted, but nothing had really changed. The chaos from the day was still hanging in the air, but I had done it. I had claimed my place. And yet there was still something I needed to understand, something that had been left unsaid. My mother, who had been so fragile, so quiet for so long, had finally opened up. She had spoken the truth about her decisions, about the house, about me. But there was more, so much more, that I hadn't yet heard. The things she had hidden, the pieces of the past she had kept locked away, were finally coming to light. I sat on the couch, my hands resting on my lap, trying to steady my breath. My mother sat beside me, and for a moment neither of us spoke. She was so still, her frail body curled into the cushions. But her eyes, those eyes, spoke volumes. They had always been tired, worn, but now there was something else in them, something like peace. She wasn't just my mother in that moment. She was a woman who had carried a burden for far too long. Finally, she broke the silence. "There's something I need to show you," she said softly. Her voice was low, almost hesitant, as if she wasn't sure if she was ready to reveal what had been buried for so many years. But I could see the determination in her eyes. She had waited until the right moment to tell me everything. She stood slowly, her movements unsteady but deliberate, and walked to a small wooden chest near the window. It wasn't anything special to look at, a simple worn-out box, but it held something inside that I wasn't prepared for. She opened the box and pulled out a small, faded blue velvet box. It was delicate, worn at the edges, and yet there was something reverent about the way she held it. She placed it gently in my hands, and I stared at it for a moment, unsure of what was inside. It was heavier than I had expected, and the weight of it sent a shiver down my spine. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, were old photographs, yellowed letters, and a small folded notebook. My heart thudded in my chest as I carefully picked up the notebook. It was old, much older than anything I had ever seen before. The leather cover was worn, the edges frayed with time, but what struck me the most were the words inscribed on the cover in faded ink. "The reason you were chosen." I opened the notebook cautiously, almost afraid to disturb the fragile pages. The first page was blank, but as I turned it, I found something unexpected. My mother's handwriting, neat, precise, but filled with emotion. I felt a pang of sadness as I read the first line. "From the moment you were born, I knew you would carry the weight of this family. You were never meant to be seen. You were meant to be the quiet strength that held everything together." I read those words over and over, feeling the weight of them settle into my chest. For all these years I had believed that I was invisible, that no one cared about the things I did. But my mother had seen me. She had known all along what I was doing, and she had chosen me. Tears welled up in my eyes as I turned the pages. The notebook was filled with entries about the sacrifices I had made over the years. It detailed moments when I had stepped in, when I had been the one to fix things, to take on responsibilities no one else had even acknowledged. Each entry was a record of my life, the things I had done to protect this family, to keep the house standing, to make sure my mother was cared for, even when no one else bothered to. One entry in particular caught my eye. When the house began to fall apart, when the roof needed fixing and the walls started to crack, Rachel was the one who stepped in. She fixed the plumbing, paid the bills, and made sure everything stayed in place. No one saw it, but I did. I watched her work tirelessly, without asking for anything in return. I couldn't stop the tears that came. My mother had always been the quiet one, but she had watched me. She had seen everything I had done, every moment I had sacrificed for the sake of this family. She had carried that knowledge quietly, knowing that someday I would need to understand just how much I mattered. As I turned the page, I found the final entry, the one that hit me the hardest. "You are my strength, Rachel. You are the reason I kept going, even when it seemed like everything was falling apart. You have always been the one to carry this family, and now it's time for you to take what is yours. This house, this family is yours to protect. I've chosen you because you are the one who has always been there, even when everyone else wasn't." I closed the notebook, my hands trembling. I looked up at my mother, who had been watching me silently. She was no longer the weak woman I had seen for so many years. She was the woman who had chosen me, who had trusted me with everything that mattered. "I didn't know, Mum," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "I didn't know you saw me like this. I thought I was just invisible." "You were never invisible, Rachel," she whispered, her voice filled with warmth. "You were always the one who kept us together, the one who saved us when no one else could." I looked at the photo album in my lap, the old photographs, the letters. I finally understood what it meant to be chosen, to be the one who carried the weight. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly seen. This was my inheritance, the love, the strength, the responsibility. It wasn't just about the house. It was about everything I had carried in silence, everything I had done without ever asking for recognition. It was about finally understanding that I was not just a caretaker. I was the one who had been chosen to lead. I sat there, holding the old notebook in my hands, feeling the weight of everything it represented. My mother, the quiet observer who had watched me for years, had seen me more clearly than I had ever realised. Her words, each carefully written, painted a picture of my life, a life I had lived without fanfare, without recognition, simply because it was my duty. But now, as I sat there with my mother beside me, I felt as though I was finally understanding the true scope of my actions, the full extent of my sacrifices. My mother, however, wasn't finished. There was something more she needed to say, something that had been held back for years, and I could see it in the way she was looking at me, like she was both afraid and relieved to finally speak the truth. "You know," she began quietly, her voice trembling just a little. "I never told you this before, Rachel. I never told you how hard it was for me to believe in you at first." My heart stilled, and I looked at her, unsure of what she meant. "What do you mean, Mum?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, wringing her hands in her lap before meeting my gaze. "When you were young, I didn't see the person you were becoming. You were always so quiet, so careful. I thought you were just trying to avoid conflict, trying to stay out of the way." She paused, her face clouding with regret. "I didn't believe you could carry all of this, Rachel. I didn't believe you could handle it, because you never asked for help. And for a long time, I thought you were hiding from what needed to be done." Her words hit me like a wave, and I struggled to keep my composure. For so long, I had felt like I was invisible to her, like my efforts went unnoticed. But hearing her say that she had once doubted me, doubted my strength, my ability to handle everything, cut deeper than I expected. "I didn't understand," she continued, her voice quieter now. But then, as the years went by, I started to see what you were doing. When the steps outside began to sink and you fixed them without asking anyone for help. When the bills started to pile up and you paid them even when it meant sacrificing something for yourself. Her voice broke slightly as she continued, "And when the roof started leaking and you found the money to fix it without even telling me, I began to realise how wrong I was." I could feel the tears prickling at the edges of my eyes. All these years I had worked silently, without ever once complaining, without ever asking for anyone's acknowledgement. I had done it because it was the right thing to do, but hearing my mother finally admit that she had doubted me, that she had once thought I was weak, was harder than I had expected. "I'm so sorry, Rachel," she whispered, her voice filled with regret. "I never should have doubted you. You've been the one holding this family together all along, and I never gave you the credit you deserved." I wiped my eyes quickly, trying to push back the tears. "It's okay, Mum," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You didn't know, but now you do." My mother reached out and took my hand, squeezing it gently. "I've always been proud of you, even if I didn't show it, and I know now that you were always the one who would save us. You were the one who would protect this family, even when no one else saw it." I sat in silence for a moment, letting her words wash over me. For the first time in my life, I felt like the weight I had been carrying on my shoulders, in my heart, had lifted. My mother, who had always been silent, had finally given me the validation I had craved for so long. I stood up, walking to the front door, and I opened it. The morning air felt fresh, like a new beginning was finally on the horizon. I looked out at the house, our house, the place that had been both my burden and my refuge. I stood there for a long time, taking in the view. The house was still the same, but something inside me had shifted. I no longer saw it as just a place to live, a property to maintain. Now it was something more. It was a legacy, something that I would carry forward, something I would protect for generations to come. I turned to my mother, who had followed me to the door. She stood beside me, her frail hand resting on the railing, and I could see the same understanding in her eyes that I had felt in my own heart. We had both come to realise something. This house was more than bricks and mortar. It was a symbol of our bond, of everything we had built and fought for together. "I'm going to protect this, Mum," I said, my voice steady now. "I'm going to make sure this family stays together, no matter what happens." She nodded, her eyes soft with pride. "I know you will, Rachel. You've always known how to protect the things that matter." And with that, I closed the door behind us, knowing that whatever happened, I had finally found my place in this world, not just as a daughter, but as someone who had earned the right to be seen. To anyone who's ever been the quiet one in their own family, I see you.